In this video, we're going to learn how to start a Godot project, and we're also going to learn a little bit about navigating Godot's interface. So you can see here I have a nice clean desktop, and I'm going to go ahead and launch Godot, which I have down here. So I'm just going to click on that, and because I haven't used Godot before, it's going to give me this warning: you don't currently have any projects, and I'm just going to click cancel. I don't need that anymore. And using the project manager, using the buttons over here on the right, I'm going to click new project, and then I'm going to have to set a couple of important things. First and foremost, I want to think about the project path. In other words, where on my computer do I want this project to be saved? Now, by default, it's putting it in my personal directory on my laptop, but I want to change that. So I'm going to click Browse, and you can see here it's showing me these are all of the folders in my personal directory on my computer. You can see applications, desktop, documents, so on and so forth. If I wanted to go up one level, I could click this arrow right here, but I'm going to stay in the Dan.Hoffman folder, and I'm actually going to select the desktop because that's where I want to work. And once I've specified that I want to work in my desktop, I'm going to select the current folder. Now I can give my project a name. And because this is session 2, I'm just going to call this the project session 2. And I'm actually going to ask Godot to create a folder on my desktop called session 2. So I'm going to click create that folder, and you can see here that the path to my project session_2, it's going to be on my desktop, and it's going to be called session_2. That's where it's going to save it. And if we look over here on the right, indeed, Godot has already created that folder for me. And so now I'm going to say create and edit, and Godot is going to load up. Now, your interface should look something like this. Let's take a couple of minutes just to get familiar with this interface. It can be a little overwhelming at first. The first couple of things you should notice is up here we have the main menus. And Scene, Project, Debug, Editor, Help. Those will always be there, and we'll learn when and how to use those. We also have the 4 main workspaces: 2D, 3D, Script, and Asset Lib. And we can click between these, and you can see the main workspace of the Godot engine changes. And then we also have playtest buttons over here, which we'll learn how to use. Everything else, these areas along the side and the bottom, these are called docks, and they have very specific names. So one here is the scene dock, and we're in the workspace right now, we're looking at a 3D scene, and this is telling us all of the information in this 3D scene. We also have the file system dock, and it's showing us some of the resources that are related to this project. Of course, there isn't much located here because we're just starting with a blank project. And then over here on the right, we have the inspector dock and panel. We will be using this a lot. We also have the node dock. And one thing I want to show you is you can actually reposition these docks by clicking on the 3 little dots. And I could actually move it to over here. And notice that the scene dock comes back over there. And I could send it back over. And I could send it down below if I wanted to divide this in half. These are all pre-programmed positions that allow me to manipulate where these are. I can also drag and drop them to the position that I want. I also want to show you the output dock down at the bottom. And you can see here there's output, debugger, audio, animation. We'll be using the debugger view a lot to be looking at errors and debugging, and also the output. As you play around with this, you may accidentally create a configuration or a layout that you don't want. If that ever happens, you could come up to Editor and come down to Editor Layout, and then just click Default, and it will reset everything for you. Okay, so that's Editor, Editor Layout, and click Default. Another thing you might want to do is if you have a fairly small screen, you may want to toggle full screen just so you're maximizing what you're looking at. I typically don't work in full screen mode, so I'm going to toggle out of that. Now we know our way a little bit around the interface. Let's actually begin to build something using Godot. So we're going to start in 2D mode. So I'm going to come over here and click. And the first thing that I want you to notice is this rectangle right here. Now, this is what they call the viewport, or you can think of this as kind of like the stage of your game, meaning anything that's within the bounds of this rectangle or within the bounds of the viewport is going to be visible. And I can actually zoom in on this by clicking this plus, or I can zoom way out on it by clicking the minus sign right here. Another important thing, if I'm zoomed way out and I want to jump back in, if I just click the 1 right here, boom, it'll bring it back to its normal scale. Another thing I can do is hold down the space bar and drag the viewport around in this window so I can get it to the size that I want. Another way, I can hit Control plus and that will increase the size. Or I can just go back to its default size by clicking 1. So this is called the viewport. Now, one of the questions that immediately comes up is, well, what is the size of the viewport? So let me show you how to know what the size of the viewport is. By default, the viewport is 1024 by 600. In other words, it's 1024 pixels this way, and it's 600 pixels this way. Now, how do I know that? Well, I can actually look and try to guesstimate what it is, but this is actually a setting that we can change for our project. So let's take a look at some project settings. I'm going to click Project. In this menu, the very first item is Project Settings. So I'm going to click that, and I get all kinds of settings that come up. And let's take a look at some of the things. So we can look at the application, how it debugs, how it uses network, how it renders things, but ultimately we're interested right now is the window. And if I click on window, I have all of these properties of the window that I can adjust. And you can see here, by default, we have a width of 1024 pixels and a height of 600. And if I can drag and drop these if I wanted to, I could make our viewport look very different. I don't want to do that. I want to keep it to the default, so I'm just going to undo that. But I want you to know that's where you set the width and height of your viewport for your two-dimensional game or simulation. So let's close out of here. There's one last thing that I want to share with you. And that is, you can actually change the theme of the Godot editor. Let's click on Editor and come to Editor Settings again. And in the editor settings, there's all kinds of settings I can change about how this editor works. Most of these you won't need to manipulate, but I did want to show you quickly you can change the theme of the editor. Now, the preset theme actually is the default theme that comes with Godot. But there are several prepackaged themes that you might prefer. You click, you drop down this window, and you might like to use the alien theme. So I select that, and it takes a second to process, but boom, notice that the interface changed colors. It uses this dark gray. It's quite similar actually to the dark blue of the default setting, but the accent color is this bright alien-like green. There are also some more or much brighter themes that I can apply. So for example, I might choose light, and again, it will take a minute to load up, and it will apply a light theme. So let's just take a look at that. This looks much more like a typical software application and less game-like. So this is really just personal preference. For now, I'll just keep it on the default setting, but I wanted you to know that you can change the editor in that way.